You are standing in a forest. The path you came in on is gone. Every direction looks the same. Your phone has no signal. Your sense of direction has failed. And something old, something your body knows before your brain does, starts to take over. That feeling is not panic. Not yet. It is something more ancient. A system switching on inside you that was built for exactly this moment. Refined across hundreds of thousands of years of humans getting lost, and either finding their way back or not. The real question is not what you do when you get lost. The question is what your ancestors did, and how much of that is still running inside you right now. Because getting lost was not a rare disaster for most of human history. It was a regular feature of daily life. Hunters followed prey far beyond familiar territory. Foragers pushed into new land. Children wandered. Storms erased landmarks, and the humans who survived were not necessarily the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones whose brains had developed specific tools for spatial recovery. You inherited every one of those tools. Anthropologist and cognitive scientist Daniel Everett, who spent decades living with and studying the Piraha people of the Amazon, documented something that researchers have now observed across dozens of traditional hunter-gatherer societies. An extraordinary capacity for spatial memory and landmark recognition that modern urban humans almost entirely fail to develop. Members of these groups could navigate through hundreds of kilometers of dense forest, return to specific trees they had visited once years earlier, and describe routes through territory they had crossed a single time in childhood. Not because they were a different kind of human, because they had been using these systems constantly since birth. Your brain has the same hardware. You just haven't been running the software. Let's go back to the ancient moment of getting lost. The first thing that happened, before the panic, before any conscious decision, was a shift in how your ancestor's brain was processing information. Under normal conditions, your spatial navigation runs on a kind of autopilot. Familiar routes, known landmarks, habitual paths. The hippocampus, the brain region responsible for spatial mapping, ticks along quietly in the background. The moment familiarity disappears, something changes. Neuroscientist Eleanor Maguire of University College London, whose research on taxi drivers and spatial navigation is among the most cited in cognitive neuroscience, has shown that active spatial problem-solving, genuine wayfinding under uncertainty, lights up the hippocampus in a fundamentally different way than following a known route. The brain shifts from retrieval to construction. Instead of pulling up a stored map, it starts building one in real time. Your ancestor's brain, when lost, began building. What did that look like in practice? The first move was almost always stillness. Stop moving. This is counterintuitive. Every instinct in a panic state screams to move, to do something, to get away from the feeling of lostness. But experienced navigators across cultures, from Arctic hunters to Amazonian foragers to Polynesian sailors, share a common first step. Stop, look, listen. Stillness serves two purposes. It prevents you from moving further into unknown territory, and it gives your brain the quiet it needs to start retrieving partial information. Fragments of landmarks, directional cues from light and sound, the angle of shadows, the direction of the wind, the slope of the ground. Your brain, even now, is running these calculations constantly in the background. You just rarely have to bring them to the surface. Ancient humans also used something that modern people have largely lost access to: dead reckoning. The ability to track your own movement through space, distance traveled, direction moved, turns taken, and use that information to calculate where you are relative to where you started. Sailors called it dead reckoning. Cognitive scientists call it path integration. Every mammal with a hippocampus does this automatically. But like spatial memory, the system degrades with disuse. Research by neuroscientist John O'Keefe, who won the Nobel Prize in 2014 for his discovery of place cells in the brain, neurons, that fire specifically in response to your location, in space, has shown that these cells require active navigation to stay sharp. People who use GPS for every journey show measurable reduction in hippocampal activity over time, compared to people who navigate independently. You are, in a very real sense, outsourcing your ancient navigation system and watching it quietly switch off. Now let's talk about what happened when the stillness didn't work, when your ancestor couldn't locate themselves through quiet observation. The social system activated. This is the piece that almost nobody talks about when discussing human navigation. Getting lost was not just a personal problem. It was a group emergency. In traditional societies, a missing person, especially a hunter who hadn't returned, triggered organized search behavior. Not random searching, but systematic coverage of territory, with searchers moving in expanding arcs from the last known location, calling and listening, checking water sources and high ground first. The entire group's survival depended on recovering its members. A skilled hunter lost in unfamiliar territory represented not just a personal tragedy, but a loss of knowledge, of experience, of someone who knew where things were. Societies that developed effective search and recovery behaviors outlasted those that didn't. Your instinct to call for help when lost, to make noise, to seek high ground, to move toward water, is not random. It is the encoded wisdom of thousands of generations of successful recoveries. Evolutionary psychologist David Geary at the University of Missouri has studied sex differences in spatial navigation across cultures and found remarkably consistent patterns. Men in hunter-gatherer societies tend to navigate by geometric calculation and cardinal directions, while women tend to navigate by landmark sequences. Both strategies work. Both are present in your brain right now. And under stress, most people default unconsciously to whichever strategy their developmental environment reinforced most. The forest doesn't care which one you use. It only cares whether it works. Here is what gets stranger. Research on people who have been genuinely lost. Wilderness survival cases studied by search and rescue teams reveals a consistent behavioral pattern that runs directly counter to survival logic. It is called negative tracking, and it happens when a lost person, in a state of rising panic, actively moves away from searchers. They hear voices calling. They move in the opposite direction. Researchers believe this is a fear response originally. Designed to avoid predators, the impulse to hide when threatened, misfiring. In a context where the threat is social embarrassment, or the terror of being found helpless, your ancient fear response cannot tell the difference between a predator and a search party. It just knows something is coming, and something in you wants to disappear. Understanding this has changed how search and rescue teams operate. Modern searchers are trained to look not just in the direction a lost person was heading, but in the places where a person in a fear response would hide. Under dense cover, in low ground, in enclosed spaces that feel like shelter. They are searching for where your ancient brain would take you. So what do you do with all of this? The next time you are in an unfamiliar place, a new city, a new building, a new trail, your brain is building a map. Not a perfect one, not a conscious one, but a real one, assembled from shadows and slopes and sounds and the angle of light through trees. You came from people who built those maps in the dark, in the cold, in territory that had never been named. They did it with nothing but the hardware evolution gave them and the knowledge that going home was worth the effort of figuring out which way home was. That hardware is still in you. But there is one more layer worth understanding. The experience of being lost is not just a navigational problem, it is an identity problem. Psychologists studying disorientation have found that the distress of being physically lost is not primarily about the danger of the situation. It is about the sudden loss of a coherent self-narrative. You know where you are going. You know how to get there. You know what comes next. Being lost strips all of that away simultaneously. The cognitive load is not just spatial. It is existential. This is why people who are physically lost often describe the experience in terms that sound almost philosophical. They don't just say they didn't know where they were. They say they didn't know who they were. The sense of location and the sense of self are more tightly connected than most people realize. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio at the University of Southern California has argued that the brain's sense of self is partly constructed through continuous feedback from the body's position in space. Where you are shapes who you feel you are. Disrupt one, and you disrupt the other. Your ancestors experienced this. The feeling of being lost was not just a practical emergency. It was a brief unraveling of the self, and the relief of finding the way back was not just physical safety. It was the restoration of something deeper, a coherent relationship between the self and the world. Every time you orient yourself, check a landmark. Look at the sun, recognize a sound. You are not just navigating. You are reassembling yourself. Consider what it took to survive being lost before any of the tools we now take for granted existed. No trail markers, no map, no compass, no signal fire visible for miles. Just a human brain, a body, and a landscape that gave no guarantees. The people who made it back did so because of a cluster of abilities that researchers now recognize as a suite. Spatial memory, path integration, landmark recognition, environmental reading, and the capacity to stay calm long enough for those systems to function. Panic degrades all of them simultaneously. Calm restores them. This is why experienced wilderness guides consistently say the same thing. The most important survival skill is not any physical technique. It is the ability to slow your breathing, lower your heart rate, and give your brain the few seconds it needs to shift from fear response to problem-solving mode. Your ancestors who survived being lost were, in a meaningful sense, the ones who had learned, or were built, to do exactly that. To feel the fear and then move through it into function. That capacity is in you too. It has just been waiting for a moment that required it.